Recover, perform, excel. What do those words really mean in a world where injury, recovery and performance are forever evolving? It's time to find out with a performance and rehabilitation podcast from Kikko Health. Okay, so first of all, we have Dave Fevre with us today. Probably needs no introduction to many people out there, but a little bit of background on Dave. Long history in rugby league through Leigh, Wigan and Great Britain Rugby League. Moving into football then with Manchester United, Blackburn Rovers, and then there's quite a few more clubs on the list there, Dave. Chelsea, Leicester, Salford, Barrow, Man City. But most recently, England 11 for Soccer Aid. So first of all, how are you feeling after the weekend? It was great to be involved in that, I suppose.
It was a brilliant experience, and it was obviously controlled a lot by the media and how it ran for ITV and everything else. But you see, you're never too old to learn and experience something new. And looking after the players was easy in terms of the footballers, but again, getting used to working with obviously the actors and the singers and all that sort of thing. But they were all brilliant. Everybody was, both from the staff and both the players, everybody was really responsive, and it was a really good 4 days. I really enjoyed it, and the people I worked with were excellent. Gary Lewin and Colin Lewin, and then the rest of the masseurs, Laura, Emma, Steve, and John Green, and what have you, and the doc Matt. It was really good because it was basically a southern medical team plus me, so that's how it basically panned out. So I think I was the butt of the jokes most of the time, but never mind. I held my own, I think.
No, good. And obviously got a little step back in time for you to be back in the dugout at Old Trafford,
yes.
I suppose.
The worrying thing was I calculated it was 26 years from when I last sat in that seat.
And you chose the same seat, did you?
No, I went in on purpose just to say, look, this is the seat I used to sit in. I used to obviously sit in the other dugout when I was at Blackburn, but it was a bit surreal. And being in the home dressing room, that's the other thing that was surreal as well. But it was brilliant. It was great. It was nice. And again, because of the way the structure of the coaching team set up, my job was to do the warm-ups as well. So I ended up probably doing more than I would have done on a match day for United. So it was good, mate. No, it was good.
So rolling back the years of taking the warm-up as well, that takes me back to the start of my career.
Shortage of staff, you see. I think I did it for 3 days running. In fact, on the second day, I had to do both teams at the same time within the size of a penalty box area for 40 players. So that was a first.
Like you say, still learning, Dave.
Still learning, mate. Cope with 40 players in a penalty box and see if you can cope with it. But no, it's fine.
No, fantastic. Look, this is obviously a great thing for me having you as a guest on this, Dave, because if I look back to the start of my career, and those of you might not know this out there, that Dave gave me probably my first opportunity as a student in March 2000.
Wow.
Yeah, we're showing both our ages there. And then I was fortunate enough to come then and join Blackburn in the summer, the following summer, sort of pre-season there later in that year. So to have you on, Dave, is a great thing for me personally. You've taught me a lot about things through my career. A great mentor to me from the start. So no, just so you know, much appreciated.
No problem, mate. Not a problem.
So I guess going back for yourself then, Dave, and again, I'm sure with the number of things that you've done in the past, people might have a bit of an insight into it, but how did you fall on the decision to go into the world of physio?
I wanted to be a PE teacher, to be honest, and didn't get the grades, went to Loughborough, and at that time when you went to Loughborough, you all attended in your England tracksuits, whatever. I played for North of England, and when I got there, I realised I'd got little chance because everybody else had England or their country on their blazers, and I had North of England, and as I didn't get in, and I didn't want to go to Loughborough, I could have gone to Carnegie, and I didn't want that. I either wanted Loughborough or nothing. And I didn't get to Loughborough, so I decided to have to change tack. And at that time, there weren't many male physios around, and I was into my sport, so I thought, well, let's go for it and see what happens. My mum and dad just said, look, do what you think's right, and go it that way, and that's the way I did it, really, John.
And not look back since?
Not at all. Never would for 1 minute would I want to change. And the worst thing now is that when you go on conferences and you're speaking, and I meet the 21, 20, I met a young MRI student on Sunday at the game who came up to me just to have a word. And I said to her, I said, the most important, I wish I was your age to start again because I enjoy it so much and I still love it now. It's not something I could ever see myself packing in, but I said to her, I was jealous of her being at her age and still, just starting on that road. So that enthusiasm hopefully shows in the way you work, and that's until I lose that, then I'll keep doing it.
With that in mind, then I guess what is on the agenda at the moment? What's on the schedule moving forward for you, Dave? Obviously, like we said, we just mentioned involvement in Soccer Aid. I know recently you did a presentation over in Finland.
I've got a few more international ones coming up. I've got Denmark coming up, and I've got obviously my FA stuff and the rugby league stuff coming up. And at the rest of the time, it depends on what happens on my mobile in the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour. And it's a nice way to be in a way. You're not sitting by your phone, but if you don't get any phone calls, I've got plenty of other things to do, and I'll just wait for that and see what comes along. And I quite like that ability to be able to do what I want when I want, which is great. And then if somebody rings me and says, "Can you come and do a year here, or 6 months, or a month, or a week?" then I'll go and do it if it's what I want to do. So it's a great stage in my career to be doing it really now. I thought probably 8 years ago when I left Blackburn, I thought probably within a year or two, then it would start to be that I wouldn't be relevant. And ironically, my phone's never been busier in the last 8 years than it ever was when I was working full time in football. So who knows what's going to come up in the next few weeks, months, days, whatever.
Look, that's amazing in the sense because I've just recently come out of full time football, as obviously you know, Doug, but the listeners might not. And even today, and I sort of felt the same way coming out, thinking, well, what's going to be next? What am I going to do? How am I going to fill it? Here we are on the podcast today. We never thought you and I would be sat here necessarily doing this.
But we did chat about that, and I said to you, I said, look, go with it. If you can do it, and you tick all the boxes at home, and you can do all that, it's easy for me. My kids have grown up, but I think in that situation, we've worked so hard over the years, and you've been controlled by what the club's patterns of movement are. You're very tied in what you can do, and now by being it this way, as long as you've enough work to pay the bills, then you can go whichever direction you want to go. So I would encourage anybody, but it's having that bravery to go out there and move it on to the next level. You know, I only did it once my kids had all gone through uni. And once they'd all gone through uni, then it was just a matter of, well, it's time for us to start doing what we want to do, and then just letting the job take its role as it goes.
But for yourself then, Dave, like going forward, like you say, the lecturing, presentation, whatever comes across, but you've still got that passion for the hands-on stuff as well as the teaching and lecturing.
That's where I see myself as a clinician. And people try and slot me into roles, and if it's not clinically based, then I'm not interested. I don't want to be somebody that just sits behind a desk and sort of supervises where people go A, B, C, D. I want to be part of that team that's going outside and doing the outdoor rehab and doing the pitch side trauma. Obviously, we're doing the teaching for ATMIF and IMOF, then that's obviously a little bit different. But in that situation, that's the way my career's always been. And I think it's very easy as you get older just to start to move into a more administrative role, and that does not float my boat.
And do you think that's changed over time?
For me personally, or
just in general in the world of sport? I mean, when I remember starting off as a young, just leaving university, there was yourself, some great clinicians at Blackburn Rovers when I joined, Paul Kelly, Phil Batty, Nick Broad, who was there obviously a couple of days a week.
Sure.
Comparing that setup, and you mentioned the changes and this sort of movement upwards into a potentially more organisational role. How do you see that the dynamics of elite sport have changed over your career?
We probably did it without even thinking about it, and it was part and parcel of it. Now we've got a job title for it, and it's a matter of we've got performance-based approach. We've got a rehabilitation-based approach. We've got a match day, physio-based approach as well. So jobs have been split and dissected, and a bit like you're saying there, when we started out, it was a matter of having 2 physios, 1 soft tissue masser, no fitness coach. That was part of our remit. That was part of our job. If we had a doctor 2 days a week, we were lucky. So I think the numbers now have obviously changed. I mean, one of the clubs I've been into in the last couple of years, we had 16 medical practitioners on the first team without the doctors included in that. Right. So you've got numbers and numbers of people. And I think the other thing that's changed a lot, really, John, is that number of people now that I see a lot of clubs lower down the chain that basically are filling the positions as required by the FA. So they see, right, we need 2 physios, and they will try and get young physios. No disrespect to that, but it's on the basis that financially it's not going to cost them as much money. And there's been a massive drive that way towards bringing in and ticking the boxes for the FA requirements of having 1 ATMIF physio or 1 chartered physio based. But regardless of the experience, it's been the younger staff that's come in because it's easier and cheaper to employ them. The problem is then it backfires because when an injury starts to go wrong, the manager starts to look for a bit more experience. And I certainly think in the last 8 years, that's probably 80-90% of the jobs have only happened because something's gone wrong and they want a bit more of an experience-based handle on things rather than the younger physio that just ticks the box.
Again, through my career, and as long as I've known you, you've been a massive advocate for education, for development. Obviously you enjoy teaching with
Sure.
the role that you have with the FA and the rugby league. Do you think this is something that more should be done for those people coming into those roles centrally, or do you think it's a club responsibility to try and develop those people?
I think the way the FA have gone about it, and hats off to Lisa and what she's done at the FA. The pitch side stuff has gone from strength to strength. So from the old Remo and area courses to now where we are with APMIF is a massive improvement on where we were. I think internally, it's like most things in rehab, it goes round in circles, it comes round in fashion. And I think in terms of what's happening there, people suddenly try and reinvent the wheel. And then they start to put this out, and probably people from my generation will go, hang on a minute, we've done all this once, twice, three times throughout our careers. So I think in that situation, it's very easy to get carried away. And the way that the world's gone now, and it's very numbers based, then obviously we start to look at rehab in that side rather than, my worry is that we end up sitting behind numbers to protect ourselves rather than going on our clinical assessment and judgment, really.
I think with that, and then you sort of touched on the I guess the use of objective data there, don't you? The use of how things have changed a little bit in the need for constant monitoring, in the need for objective reports, whether that be through GPS, whether that be through some objective testing, whether that be handheld dynamometers, whether that be Isokinetic dynamometers. How do you feel the influence of that has changed over time? Obviously, because you taught me from the onset of my career about the use of Isokinetics in sport, and obviously we had the Ride-X at Blackburn Rovers and used that through our career. But how do you think that's changed, or how do you think the importance of that has changed?
I think we've got to a situation now where we are very numbers driven, and my concern is that some of those numbers are, as I said before, the numbers we're using to try and protect ourselves rather than looking for the reaction of the player. So I think we've got to know what's relevant and what's not relevant. We need to not get into this habit of producing a Grey's Anatomy sized document, and yet only 2 pages are relevant. And that unfortunately happens a lot of the time. And, at the end of the day, and again, whether it's from my generation or whatever, is that if we sit behind all these numbers, we can go to the coach and go, well, we told you he wasn't fit because his tensor fascial outer strength is down 10% from what it... Now, that to me doesn't make any sense. It's just, we're looking at numbers to find an excuse for the player not to train. And you've got to have that understanding that resilient players will play through what scan wise or number wise tell us there's something slightly wrong. And one of the big skills of being within a team is knowing who can cope with that little bit of a niggle and those who can't. And that's a judgment that you can't do by producing numbers, and you've got to know your characters. Those soft skills that we learn in terms of knowing our squad and our players, our profiling of players will tell us about their skeleton and what it can do. And at the end of the day, I was always taught that every player has their own particular biochemistry, their own biomechanics, and their own psychosocial. And when we're drawing up those rehab programs, we need to consider that. If we just go on the internet and wheel them off because we've got an ACL diagnosis, then we're not doing our jobs. We're playing at it, really.
And I guess with that, do you find, obviously, I found sort of as the years have gone on, the difference in, because it's become the norm in that way, the difference from maybe the players as well of how they approach.
I think you're right. I think the players have now got so number driven that sometimes, again, they're frightened to go on it. That generation of resilient players doesn't exist, and your judgment, I've had players where I've taken them out for a fitness test and they've done everything I've asked them, and then at the end of the game they told me, I could feel it all the way through, but I wasn't coming off. And so in that situation, you're relying on their honesty from it. But those players who've got through it in 90 minutes and have played, or 80 minutes, certainly in rugby league terms, then it's just knowing those characters that can deal with that. Many a time I've had discussions with doctors who scan things and they see a grade 1, and the individual concerned is tough enough to cope with that, and his position will allow him to do it, his mentality will allow him to do it. And the players probably say, Dave, I'm absolutely fine, don't have any qualms with me not playing. And yet, clinically, the doc will go, look, there's a scan here that says, yeah, but doc, you've got to know your players. So I think that's a big thing. And you don't know that by the numbers. You don't know that by the report. So,
but you mentioned earlier about, are we in that phase where there needs to be an element, or not needs to be, that's probably not fair, but there's an element of self-preservation and self-protection. If we've got a diagnosis that there is something there, and somebody then goes on and makes things worse, or
Yeah.
how would you deal with that situation if things went downhill? Because I guess sort of some of those young practitioners that are out there that we spoke about, in those situations, they're having to make those calls at the moment, and then
Yeah.
potentially not being given the support if things do go wrong, because we've all been there when things have gone, not to plan.
Yeah.
Probably sometimes part of our greatest learnings have been when things haven't gone to plan.
Oh, without a doubt. And well, that's your career is based on learning from your mistakes or learning from things that you perhaps jumped in and thought, you know what, I trusted the player too much there. We've all had it where players, they tell you they don't feel the pain, and then 10 minutes into the game they're waving you off, and you go, well, I didn't feel it when we did the test. So I would reflect and go, well, did I test him hard enough? Did I push him hard enough for his position? Or is it that the player just tried to hide it and think he'd be able to run it off with a few painkillers and a bit of mental strength, and it's not worked? So I think that's one thing you do learn from. I was always taught years ago, I don't think it's quite as bad as what I was told, but I was always told never trust players, they'll take the milk out of your tea. Now, in that situation, there's probably players that we both know that would take the milk, the tea bag, the water, and the sugar out of the tea, but there are other players who are the opposite. So I think that's changed a little bit there. The players have now got more power, and it's definitely changed that concept. But it's important that you build your relationships really quick. It's like doing the soccer aid thing this week. Most of the players I knew, but most of the media people and most of the actors I've never met before. So even when I'm not treating them, it's important to build a relationship with them, then to try and when I do come around to treat them, or they're in my team, whatever, that I've got an inkling of what's going on, and try and know them as characters. So the ones that are quiet, you get to know the ones who need an arm round, the ones who need a bit of a push. Then it's just getting that. So no time's ever wasted, even if you're not treating anybody directly.
You mentioned earlier as well that like the soft skills of managing a team and managing the department are something that, I think you emphasise the importance. I watched the game the other night, and I saw you attend someone on the pitch, and I saw you, the concern in your face, because I knew that you knew that person from before, and you knew how maybe to manage that individual,
Sure.
or what they might need. And do you think those skills, when we speak about bigger departments and lots of people in there, do you think those relationships and those softer skills become sort of less so because a player has more touch points then, there's more people to build relationships with? If you look back to when you first sort of started off, do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's something that's maybe not quite as good as it had been in the past? Or how do you feel on I guess that side?
I think one of the things, and we've seen it in recent years, the turnover of staff at clubs is very high. People are not staying for, I was at Blackburn for 19 years. People aren't staying for that length of time now. And that ability to build that relationship with a player is very short term. And it might well be that, the physio may be 5, 6, 7, 8 years younger than the players, which sometimes creates barriers. You might argue the other way that obviously I'm a lot older than some of the players, but I think in that sense, it then becomes more of a father-son relationship in that situation, or father-daughter if you work in the WSL, because you're building that relationship in a different concept. And in that situation, it's that ability to chat about things that, we've again both worked with players. I've had players that are basically illiterate and they can't read and write. And in that situation, they come to you because you can see they're getting frustrated, and there's something not right with them. I can remember one player I worked with, and nobody at the club knew that he couldn't read or write. And he put his faith in me to tell me, Dave, that's the reason why I get into trouble away from the club. And you suddenly then go and tell people at the club, and they go, "All right, we didn't know that." And if you can take that frustration away, then that allows him to be a better footballer. Because the midweek visit to the college that he should have been on and that he was getting into trouble with, we can put that right by putting him on a different course that doesn't need that skill. We can get him special English lessons. We can do this to try and make him a better footballer, to help his life and develop. So I think there's life skills that we pick up on physio wise, and you can't do that in I think with young people it's a lot harder to do it with older players. And I think if you're not there long, you don't get to know the players particularly well, and that makes a big difference.
And I think that sort of holistic overview for the players is more and more something that we're more aware of maybe now than maybe we were in the past, and sort of, their well-being, their mental health side, the support systems they have in place. So can you see it why like you say, there's not many people or even staff stay in one place for a long period of time, but probably more so, the players stay in one place for
Yeah.
even less time. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess there's becoming an increasing thing where players might have their own support system, an own medical team, an own fitness team around them. How have you found the changes in that over the years, away from, I guess, club-based to more individual-based?
I think in that situation, certainly in my experience with several of the clubs I've worked at in the last few years, that's obviously been there. I think it's a matter of trust between the two parties. It's here to stay. It's not something you're going to get rid of. But at the same time, it's developing that relationship with the players and go, look, we understand that that's going to happen. You want to do it here and there. Just be honest with us. Just be upfront. Tell us what's going on. We're happy to relay the same information back to the other parties. But in that situation, there's a line between keeping everything stum about what you're doing rehab wise and what you're doing training wise. I can remember a player at Blackburn, and it wasn't at Blackburn we never had any of that issue. But I remember one player telling me he was going to have a masseur come round and stay at his house, and I went, "It's not a problem. Thanks for being so honest. If you want to do your soft tissue, your massage stuff when you're at home with your family, I get that." And that was at his own expense. And I think we've got to move with that situation. It might not be what we want, but it's something that's there, and how we develop it and how we move on is fine. I think eventually, you hope that in time, and as you get to know the players better, and certainly in one of the clubs I've worked at, I just found a common goal to get on with the player. And once you get on with the player, within a few weeks, they're starting to come to you and go, look, my physio in Italy wants me to do this, but I'm not that keen. What do you think? Can I follow what you want to do? And it's getting that divide into it and going, get it, totally get it. I understand where you're coming from. And that's the important thing. And I think the other issue is dealing with big players is really important, and understanding that at the end of the day, they all want to be out on the pitch. As soon as you can get them out on the pitch, then it's a position they want to be in because they know they are in a stronger position than you. But then you've got to be able to think how you incorporate that with their injury and then convince them that, you know what, you do know what you're doing. And that's the important thing. If you try and fight it, I think you'll end up making it worse.
Yeah, and I think there's a player that you and I have both worked with independently at certain times in our careers, and it reminds me of an example that you've just said there of with them and going, look, I normally manage my injuries in this way, and he was an overseas player, and I want to go back home and see the people that I normally see. Well, no worries, if we'll come with you if you need us. No, I have to go on my own. That's the way it works, and this, but being open and getting those relationships and having that communication to go, look, we support you. It's no problem. Let us know what goes on so we can maybe replicate your needs here. I think that open collaboration to support the athlete is probably the key bit. And like you say, but we've all been there in the past where it's been a bit of a secret. You've been to see someone and no one says anything and no one knows anything. And I think that's probably what makes for a difficult or a more awkward management of a player.
I think you're right. And I think, don't forget the year when I started, basically there was a professional respect for your other colleagues. And I think that unfortunately has dwindled. I get agents ringing me now about seeing players at home. And I'll go, that's fine. Just get the physio and the doc from the club to give me a ring. And they go, no, we want to do it with that. I said, you'll find somebody, but you won't get Dave Fevre doing it because that's the way I've been brought up, and I'm not going to change now. It's too late in my career to change.
I'm with you. I've done it and spoken to clubs and just say, look, I've been asked this, but he's your player. I don't need to speak to him if you're quite happy. And quite often when you have those conversations, people go, oh no, I would really appreciate your input or your thought. But I think it comes back to that, and we keep coming back to this, the theme of I was guided in my career by you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
I learned those things from you, and obviously your own upbringing of what's right and wrong through your family, and just that mutual respect, professional courtesy. It's probably the demands of the sport, I think, maybe have taken a little bit that away, where people do have the power to do what they want to do.
I think you're right, and I think it's the way the profession has gone a little bit, which is a shame. Everybody's I know everybody's got to earn a living, and I get that, but you don't need to stab people in the back. I think that's wrong, and I don't like it. And I'll listen to people, and we all know people that do that. That's their choice, but it drops my respect for them in that degree if that would ever happen. And I'm sure it does happen without me knowing, but But in that situation, it's not something I ever want to do. So
No, you've got to stick to. I guess. Look, a couple of different questions. Then I guess biggest challenges, if you like. I mean, you'll have had a few over the years, and I guess then maybe biggest achievement. You've done some, which might have been when you've been in sport, but like you said, when you left Blackburn, you probably half thought in your mind that, well, I don't know what's coming next. You've had some great things. So I guess let's start with like some of the most challenging things, I guess, or just an example that we can maybe share with other people or situations you've had to deal with. Let's go with that one first.
I think in terms of rehab, I think the important thing, every injury is a challenge, whether it be a hematoma right the way through to a full-blown ACL or something more severe. I think the important thing is to know your role in your rehab pathway. Sometimes you've got to lead the individual. Sometimes you need to work alongside them. And other times you basically just steer them in the right direction. And it's knowing when to apply those appropriate moments to do it. So I think from a rehab point of view, people talk about some of the jobs I've been in the last few years about what's the pressure like. I never feel pressure. It's not a pressure. It's a challenge. And that's up to me to tick it. And if I haven't got the ability to sort that out, and I've not got the ability to look in the mirror and go, if things aren't going well, is it me? Is it something I've done? Is it something the player's doing away from that side of it? And then if that piece of the jigsaw doesn't fit, it's then trying to find the right piece that does fit in order to move it on. So I think from that point, in terms of asking me that question, in terms of the injuries, I don't really feel anything there has changed in terms of the way I've done things and the way I pillar out my rehabilitation. I think in terms of doing my lecturing, that's definitely has been challenged. Probably my hardest challenge, I think, in terms of lecturing was when I got asked to do the Oxford Union, and I thought it was a Mickey tape. I thought it was some of the lads at the club winding me up, and I had to go to my father-in-law to find out. And he looked at it and he went, "No, this is genuine." And without boring the listeners to everything that goes through, I spent 6 months preparing for this, and it was a 12-minute lecture. But I wanted to do it. I always lecture without notes and prompt cards and things like that. But I wanted to do it, and I watched various people from world leaders who'd done it, from Barack Obama through to Nigel Farage. And again, you don't agree with it, but the way that like Nigel Farage could hold the audience was phenomenal. And I watched what he did, and I thought, you know what? If I could copy that in terms of the way I did it, then it'd be brilliant. So I did spend ages looking at that.
It's funny, Dave, but I'll interrupt you because my most recent gift from someone, sort of a neighbour of mine, in fact, who works in business. She's very, very high up in the corporate world, and I'd spoke to her about the discussions of things for my own career, what we're going into, and the book she just gave me was how to develop your presentation skills for those who've got no time. Honestly, starting to read it and, like you say, looking at people, whether you like them as a person or you have an opinion or whatever, for people to do the things they've done, and we'll have the same on players. People have an opinion on a player and we'll go, that's totally wrong because we know that player. But everyone has some element of skill or, something that makes them different and stands out, that if you can steal a little bit and put it into yourself. But it made me laugh because that's literally just the book that someone sort of got around for me.
Well, you can see that. The only books I ever read are autobiographies.
Likewise. I guess you might see sort of here behind me here, Dave, like literally, it's literally autobiographies. That's all it's on the bookshelf.
The ones that I found the most helpful for my lecturing are comedians, because the comedians, if they get the first joke wrong, it's never going to work. And I've taken a lot of help from using those as books to make me think, I need to get this delivery right. This has got to be spot on, and having that side of it. So that was probably my biggest challenge. And the way the day pans out for those people who've never done it at Oxford Union, you're given a student for a couple of days to look after you. It's like you gopher, really. They take you round, and then there's a whole procession of events that go on in the day and the evening before you go into it. And there's a guy that was speaking at the same time as me, and he'd done no preparation. And we sat next to each other at dinner, and he went to me, "What do you think I should say?" And I went, "Just tell him your story." Because his story was a brilliant story. And he stood up, and ironically, you get a 10-minute bell to warn you there's only 2 minutes left. And your hand is on a central wooden box that Winston Churchill gave to Oxford Union. And the idea is that Winston Churchill's spirit goes through your arm and makes you speak better and so on. That's tradition. And he stood there, and as soon as the bell went at 10 minutes, he sat down. He couldn't cope with it anymore, but he did really well. And ironically, the person on the other side of the argument that I was after was a journalist. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm up against two journalists and somebody who works for Amnesty International. This is going to be difficult. The journalist stood up and read his 12-minute lecture off a piece of paper. And I know my wife was watching, and she knew that I would buzzing about that because I just thought that's brilliant because I know that I'm going to do 12 minutes. I know my facts are right. I know my jokes, where they're going to fit in, and I'm going to do it without any script whatsoever. So the idea was to then win the, and it was such a good thing. I remember watching Robbie Williams do Nebworth. There's a video, and when you watch him afterwards, he talks about the low after you've spoken, and I totally understand that because I remember and I listened to what he said about that, and I thought as soon as I've come off lecture, and even now with any lectures I do, you do get this little bit of a dip because you've spent so much time preparing for it.
And I guess if I can compare, and you've done the same with me, and look, to be honest, for those that are listening, I ended up in rugby league probably on your say. So I had two paths to go down. I don't know if you recall in life, David.
I do remember, yeah.
Get yourself into rugby league, and what the greatest experience. But for those that don't know, as a physio, rugby league doesn't stop if you go on the pitch, and that buzz, that involvement in the game. Whereas in football, someone goes down, everything stops.
Yeah.
You go on, you do your bit. There's no sort of like you say. It's funny because we've done it so often. I don't feel any pressure with that. I don't. And people might say, "What you've been at the stadiums that you and I have both worked at," and you think, it doesn't. You don't bat an eyelid about it.
No.
In the game, live, when you're in there, rugby league, and you're in, what a great feeling. And again, I've not nowhere near done as much lecturing or presentations, and look, that might come in time for me, but I can see that. But a performer like Robbie Williams coming through and having that sense too. I can see how you must have felt coming off the stage there with all that 6 months worth of
I was
preparation.
tempted to mention it to him yesterday, but I never really got the opportunity yesterday. I was going to say, you've led me to doing what I do. So anyway, it never happened. But I think in that situation, those sort of things are what, and that's probably, I would say that's my most challenging. I've just thought of another one now as we're chatting, is that I've never, ever been nervous about a job. And I got a job to do the Man City WSL team to go and help there. They only had one physio. And I can remember getting in up early to drive into Manchester. And I remember saying to my wife, I can feel nervous about this because I was going into a different sport with a different gender, obviously, in terms of what's there. And I remember going in, and when I got there and I found out which players I was looking after, which were all Lioness-based players. And I remember sitting down and chatting to him in the first minute, right, just put me straight on A, B, C, D, E, because I wanted to clear the air. And the girls were brilliant. I absolutely loved my 4 months. It's one of the most enjoyable jobs I've had. And it only came to an end because I ended up having to do 4 hours driving a day, which was 10 hours work, 4 hours driving, 7 days a week. I'd only signed for 4 months. But the things I learned, and I found now doing the APNIF stuff, people respect it because you've worked at lower level, you've worked at WSL. I think it makes a big difference in terms of where that remit is. But that was a challenge, and I learned a lot of things working in the women's game that I wouldn't have learned in the men's game. So I've got a lot to thank the WSL for.
But I guess from an achievement point of view as well, like that was a challenge, and we mentioned achievements too, but you've probably within the same breath, some of those are amazing achievements as well.
You think you never have the same challenge, and then something like Soccer Aid comes along and you go, well, that's another challenge. And you go, do you know what I mean? It never stops coming up. I remember doing my first after dinner speech, and it was a challenge, and you're doing these sort of things, and so it's great in a way because it gives you that enthusiasm, that buzz still. So that's why I enjoy it.
So I guess along the journey, then there's going to be things that tools that you've worked with, things that you've consistently used throughout your career, if you like, that have helped support and guide your practice as you go. So I guess thinking about back to the objective data and things that you've we discussed about the change in that over time. One thing you've taught me from the onset was the use of Isokinetics, and as well as that, or we can talk about that, but as well as that, other things that have guided you, I guess, or you'd be things that you'd turn to support your practice now. What sort of things can you give people a bit of an insight into how you work in that state?
Some of you will know that my mentor was a guy called Dennis Wright, and Dennis was very old school, and he said his attitude was anything with a 3-pin plug on isn't worth having. And I worked with Dennis in the rugby league, and I just started using Isokinetics. And I remember getting a book by George Davies given to me, probably within the first year I started using it. And I took it, we were on an away trip, sent a Challenge Cup final. Dennis and I were sharing a room. And I went in the room and I brought the book down with me, just started reading it. And it's a really thick book, probably 400 or 500 pages. And Dennis looked across, and Dennis at that stage would have been in his 60s. And he said, "What have you got there, Dave?" I said, "Oh, it's a book about Isokinetics." I said, "You won't like it. It's got a 3-pin plug on it." And he went, no, not for me. I can't believe you're reading it. And then I then went with the lads to go and play snooker in the afternoon. It was traditional at Wigan to go and play snooker on the day before the cup final. So I went. Dennis didn't want to come. I came back. He's lying on the bed. He's up to page 40. And he went, you never told me it was exercise. And from somebody who was my mentor, and he taught me about exercise, you could tell there was a little seal of approval. And at that stage, I was very fortunate to be in a job where my day was controlled by me. So where I worked at Fairfield and St Helens, it was a rehab unit that basically I'd been given carte blanche on. We had one brought in. My job was to look after rugby league players from all over the country. So Yorkshire, Lancashire, most of the lads lived in Lancashire and then came to Fairfield for the rehab. So even lads who were playing at Leeds or Castleford or that type of thing on top of St Helens. And I was at Wigan at the time. So we had a catchment area there. We had the industries like firemen. We got a contract with the fire brigade, similar size lads to the rugby league players. And we started using the IKD incorporated into the gym. So it was always in the gym. It was always, you'd have 8 or 9 lads in at once. One would be on the IKD. I'd be supervising the whole lot and running the IKD at the same time. And that went on 5-6 days a week. And the amount of positive stuff we got out of it, you've got the rugby league players who obviously want to work hard, and you could quantify that for them in terms of visual stuff and numerical stuff. The fire brigade used to basically discharge people who had an anterior cruciate ligament injury, and they weren't allowed to have surgery. If they had surgery, they were automatically kicked out of the fire brigade. And if they didn't have surgery, they didn't really have a quantitative tool to work out whether they could carry on working. So the basic thing was that they came in for like final medical reports. We'd do the test, send them and put a report with them, go, look, his leg strength's really good. This is what he can do functionally. And this is where we're at. And decisions then were made on a visual and a number judgment. And I remember can remember the lad's name, like called Steve Payne. He was a fireman, and he came and he went, you know what, Dave, I'll accept it. If they show me that my legs aren't strong enough and I've got a dip in that graph and my number's not good, left to right leg, I'll accept what's there. But if they're going to tell me just off somebody's opinion, 10 minutes listening to me, then I'm not. And you're thinking that's absolutely right. And what the costs are of retraining a fireman was phenomenal. So building from that, that's when I started to bring it into sport. Obviously, I was lucky enough to get the Man U job after that, brought it in there. So I did that for 6 years. And probably a lot of people listening to this will have seen the Roy Keane video of him smashing the machine. And there's me there with a moustache. And everywhere I go now, it's either been on TikTok or Instagram. Yeah. And everybody goes, is that you? And I go, yeah. I used to have a tash and a bit of hair.
Out again recently. Have you
mate, it keeps coming out.
You just released that one yourself again, Dave?
No, I don't do any of them. And lads will come into the clubs I'm working at and they go, is that you? And I go, yeah. And I think, you take somebody like that particular player we just mentioned. For him, he needed that goal. He needed that drive. He needed those numbers. He needed those graphs to make him realise that video that's out there was 15 months after his injury, and he was back playing then. It was just a matter of our process of retesting him. And the biggest problem, I think, for a lot of practitioners in that scenario is that you need time to learn how to use it. You need to learn how to read the data. And if you don't, you'll misread it, and then you'll make false representations. So a lot of my work now is people send me the data because players are all over the world now. It's easy for the physio to get them tested. Send me the data. I report on it, and just come back to it. So I've had players from Italy. I've had Australian players, male, female. I get all sorts of stuff sent to me that, can you just write a report for us? And that's the beauty of it.
That's fantastic. And that's something obviously I wasn't aware of either. That's great. And obviously that's still obviously a key part of your practice and thinking currently going forward. And
I think the important thing, John, is that it is very important, but it's part of the jigsaw. It's not, what I don't ever want people when I go and do IKD, this is part of my rehabilitation. It's not the be all and end all. I always think I hate seeing an IKD machine in a separate room because the players see it as a torture chamber. For me, it's got to be in the gym. It's got to be sitting amongst the other tools we've got, and then you incorporate it in. You've seen it at Blackburn where we did it, where we had players would go out and do outdoor rehab. 20 minutes later, they'd come in, do a set on there, then go back out again, just to keep topping it up and keep that muscle firing. So the ways you use it, I think, being at one of the Premier League clubs in the last couple of years, we've been using BFR, blood flow restrictions, alongside it. And I would always do the test myself before the player. So when we brought it into this club, I went, right, I'm going to do it on my own leg first. And some of the lads came watching me, and honestly, it was so hard the work. But the next day, I had no muscle soreness, nothing in there. But I said, well, look, I've done it, and it's certainly not made my legs any worse. So let's go with it. And it made a massive difference.
But it's funny that you mentioned that, and I'll always do the same with the players. I think when you put things out in front of them, whether that be functional rehab, whether that be things in the gym, I think it's always important for clinicians to have an understanding of what that feels like. I've worked with staff or my staff that I've had in the past, and you go, well, go on then, have a go, show us. I can't do that. Well, if you can't do it or show it, how do you want someone else to do it? And I appreciate that we're not elite athletes, but I think you've got to have an understanding of the feel of what something feels like before you ask others to do. I mean, we mentioned IKD, and there's probably a little bit of bias in the podcast in that sense of worry. But there are other things as well, Dave. I mentioned BFR. There are other things that you sort of maybe come into your sort of toolbox, as you like, of things that you'll use more often now than you maybe used to.
I've always liked the use of early rehab in a sandpit, which is great if you've got that available. I do go big now on TRX and using TRX at the really early stage of rehab. You know, that ability to look at that myofascial chain from lower limb, pelvic, upper limb, and incorporating that rather than isolating stuff. And certainly the lads I've worked with in the last 5 or 6 years will probably back that up in terms of what I said. So I'm a big, and the thing about the TRX is that you can take it away with you. You can go outside and do it. You can do it inside. You can use it as a functional tool. You can use it where you're using it with a ball. So that's a lot of positives for me in that side of it. I do like that, and that's one of my main things. Pool's always been a big thing for me as well. We underutilise the pool, I think, a lot of the time. You know what it was like at Blackburn. We used to have an 8:15 session for the lads, and if they turned up at 8:16, we didn't let them in. We locked them out. It's, you know, and there's that ability of respect for what we do. So I think that's a big thing as well in terms of what I do in terms of using the pool, whether it be aerobically or injury based, and sometimes just a bit of recreation just to give it that alternative. And I think the other thing as well that I do like to do is, like, certainly with the long term rehabs, is try and have one day a week where we do something completely different. You know, when I was down at a club in London, I used to take lads out on a Wednesday up Box Hill, and I remember one of the young players turning up, and he turned up and he just come in his training gear. And he went, oh, no, I've got some new gear to go out in. And he opened the back of his car, took out a brand new pair of white trainers and took labels off tops. And then, well, hang a minute, we're going out 15, 20-mile walk here. And after about 5 miles, he went, I've never walked as far as this before. I said, but we had a map. We had to find our way along certain routes, and it was scrambling. It was just a change, and we did that quite often.
So I guess bringing some of those bits in, like those other bits, and I guess reverting back to basics in that sense of, look, we're going out for a walk. I remember taking a lad mountain biking, and I know you've done the same. You know, we were fortunate enough to end up over in the States and taking a boy mountain biking up in Portland, Oregon through the mountains. It was like, you know, amazing. You know, it wasn't probably on a page of rehab that maybe got sent by a orthopedic consultant somewhere, but, you know, amazing. So I guess is the next little bit of this is to say, you know, any myth or method in the madness. There are sort of some things that you see, and social media, you know, is as it is these days, and there's so many things that crop up. Is there some things that you sort of look at and think, I'm not sure about that one, or is there some things that you think, oh, that looks great? I don't have much experience in that.
My biggest bugbear at the moment is this massive reliance on isometric measurement. I get it for some bits. I get it for players who are fatigued, who suddenly have lower isometric strength in adductors. I get it. I totally understand that. You know, your 400-meter runner that comes around the last bend and he's got nothing left in his rec fem and his psoas, he relies on it. And if players are fatigued, they will run in that 10-2. And I get that. I just get a little bit irritated by this when we take a whole body profile isometrically and you're telling me there's a 10% drop in his. I mean, I mentioned tensor fascial lata before. I was probably been a bit facetious there, but in terms of the muscles that are not really directly involved, I think we've got to be a little bit careful what we read, and again that worries me. And you know, isometrics, yeah, we do use isometrics in football because we're blocking at set pieces, we're holding players off. That isometric strength's important, and you know, we had isometrics when I first trained. That's what you did in your maximum protection and your moderate protection phases of rehab. You never did it at any other stage. So to use that as your actual tool to decide if a player's training or not training, I'm just I think we need to make a bigger picture. And I've seen it a few times now where, yeah, he's not ready to this. The other thing I see that is a little bit, people are trying to tick off numbers very early in somebody's rehab. At the end of the day, for the lads, if you can do that with a ball, you need to get a ball involved. And I've had a recent experience in the last 12 months where, a player's come back, he's gone out to do outdoor rehab, he's gone out for 6, 7 weeks. And this particular day I was asked to look after him and I went, you know what, let's get a ball out. And he sort of looked at me and went, you're joking. And I've just used a video that I've just been in Finland and I showed some videos of a player doing this particular drill after 5 minutes and doing it after an hour. And the difference in the player visually is frightening. And at the end of the day, you didn't need numbers. You didn't need, the people in the audience could see the difference between him at 10 minutes into the session and him at 50. His ability to control the ball as a central midfield player. And he went, that's the first time I've touched the ball in 5 months of rehab. And you're thinking that's not right. But there's a definite, I think, again, we've got other professions jumping into our outdoor rehab stuff and we're happy to let it go. And for me, that's our application of anatomy and injury profiling is probably the best in terms of for the individual. So surely we should be controlling that. And I find there's a reluctance now to want to do the outdoor rehab amongst physios. And it frightens me. It really frightens me that that's going to be disappearing.
Yeah, and I think as physios, it's probably one thing that we don't maybe do very well is protect our role and profession, and I think that's probably with the increased number of staff and increased specializations of roles that maybe,
yeah. I think you're right. I think my other bugbear is, though, that we've dug a little pit for ourselves, though, because we want to diverge off. We want to do ultrasound and do diagnostics off the ultrasound. I work with doctors who are far better than me, and will be far better than me as long as I live on reading ultrasound scans. Why do I not just refer them to the Phil Batties, the Duncan Robertsons, the Amit Panus of the world? And why am I getting involved when I'm not good enough at my own job? We want to do injection therapy. We want to do, okay, if somebody wants to do that's fine, but at least get your own house in order as a physio and do that size. There's still things to learn. I'm still looking at stuff and every day I'm learning, like going, yeah, these are better, this needs to be better, that. So do I have time to do ultrasound diagnosis? No, I don't. And there's people far better than me. All I've got to do is refer it. That's the easiest option.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess one part of this podcast, Dave, is to bring obviously the continuity and the theme between, guests and you guys. So one of our other guests has kindly created a question for you.
Yes, I did see this on this list. This is going to be interesting.
To be fair, I guess we may have gone over it a little bit in the things we've gone through. I think his mindset was a bit more about testing objective data. So how has the testing process changed from when you started doing screening and testing to today? And again, do you feel that they're a bit more focused on the data rather than the player in front of them? And I think we might have touched on these so far already. But
let me give you a little case I had last year where I went into a club and I went on the academy for the first week just to get to know the lie of the club and everything else. And we'd got young physios and the doc said, would you do it? I went, yeah, of course I will. And I knew the doc on the academy. And he said, can you do some CPD? Yeah. And so I turned to the younger members of staff, said, look, what CPD do you want? And they went, could you do a knee assessment? And I was like, you are joking. Surely you've got enough in your locker to do that. And I just, I look at that and I think, wow, that itself is, and I've got people there, the same people telling me that they know how to set an IKD up. And I said, look, I'm not being rude, but can you show me how to do it? And I watched them, and within a minute of doing it, I went, no.
You're banging your head against the wall.
If you set up positions not right, your data's going to be wrong. So don't even go there. But they felt within themselves that they could do it. And I just thought, you've just not had any training on it. And you probably watch somebody do a knee and think I can copy it. I remember at another club I worked at, I went in and there was a young academy physio doing it. And it was so far, the axis of movement was completely nowhere near the knee. And the length of the animal was so far up the shin, it was just not. And I went, no, look, don't ever put yourself in that position because you're going to injure somebody. And once you injure somebody on the IKD, the whole club will never use it again. I had a senior player at the same club he'd seen somebody get injured due to bad clinician management of the thing. It wasn't the player's fault. It was that somebody tried to do something too soon and basically irritated it. And and then none of the players will use it. So I think that's the important thing, is that it's knowing you know it, rather than trying to fool people. You do know how to do it. And I think in terms of that data management, like you say, we've already touched on that really in terms of where we are. I think we've just got to try and make sure we get the right balance. I think there's too big a shift now to data, whereas going back maybe a few years ago, it was too much data, too much linked to MRI. And we've now gone away from our clinical assessment. And what I always, you've heard me say this before, is that, you know, clinical assessment is a dying art, and it's too easy to have an MRI. If you're a player at a club who's got an MRI, how many times are you going to knock on the door and have an MRI? It's only next door.
Yeah.
And the diagnosis doesn't get done. You don't learn about the athlete through an MRI. You learn about the severity of injury. And how many times do we get false positives? You MRI a hit. 66% of players from latest research have got a labral tear, but it's never been clinically a problem to them. So what are we gaining out by knowing that there's an actual labral tear that's giving them no clinical significance whatsoever? So we've just got to be careful, I think.
And finally then, Dave, just from you, a takeaway, ending this conversation with a sort of a key piece of advice from you to sort of people should be doing more of, less of, things better, cut back on different things in the sense of what they're delivering, so for rehab and performance.
Yeah, I think a takeaway for me is that you're working in the best job that's possible. If you stay true to yourself and you work hard and you do it, the job will give you rewards. The job will give you the benefits. It's the best job in the world working in football, and not just football, but in sport in general. I think, you've worked in rugby league and there's other sports opportunity. I had a season in cricket, which was brilliant. And I think in that situation is that you've got to keep that passion. If you're a physio that's not enjoying your job, then you're in the wrong job, because it is the best job about, and in that situation, it's what you make of it. If you haven't got that, every day you come in, you need to have energy and enthusiasm. And if you haven't got that for the job or for the rehab process or for where you are, then it's difficult. You're not doing the job right. And that's, at the end of the day, I know what you're like. And in terms of that enthusiasm, that's the important that gets a lot of people through in that. And never be too proud that you're still learning. I know from my point of view as a tutor that on the FA stuff, my knowledge now, pitch side, is far better than when I first took the area course, remote course, and so on. I think I've done it 13 times as a delegate when I looked. And I know far more now in the last 5 or 6 years because I've learned off better practitioners than me. I've learned off paramedics and A&E. And it's the same in physio. You just got to tap into the people that are there and then buy into that fact. If you do that, then that will send you a long way, and don't be too afraid. But it's also that ability to reflect. If you don't recognize that injured tissue is more fragile than normal tissue, you will irritate things by what you give them. And it's having that, what, have I pushed them too hard? People that aren't trained. If you've not worked privately or in the NHS and you've not worked with people who are not athletes, you've got to realize that they can't take the same amount of load as an athlete can. So an athletic load is obviously really high. An untrained but fit person is just below that. And an injured tissue is, you can only change it by about 44% in terms of the latest research. So you've got to be careful. Your loaded's got to be a lot slower with an injured tissue, even with an athlete. Even if the athlete's trying to push you, don't be pushed too quickly to gradually make that better. And then just constantly reassess. Just every day reassess, not just the actual physical side of it, not just the biochemistry and the biomechanics, but, asking the player, are you happy with where we're going? Are we going in the right direction? Is it ticking the box for you? Because if they just follow what you do, that's not important. I've had so many players question me in many ways, but you've got to have an ability to come up with an answer,
Yeah.
and if you come up with an answer and there's no, you've heard me do this on Atlas before, John, but if you say, well, I might do this or I might, no. You go one way or the other. You commit yourself. You might make a mistake, but you go, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going. Not maybe, or if you say maybe, or I might put oxygen on a player when he's had a head injury. No, you don't. You put it on. It's the same with rehab. This is where we're going. If it becomes irritable, is it you or is it what the player's done away from the training ground? And we've all had scenarios where it might be us. It might be the player's gone out and done something a bit stupid. And I'm sure we could throw about a dozen examples in, which would take another podcast, really. So
we know each other too well for that one.
Yeah.
Well, look, Dave, thanks ever so much. I mean, some amazing insights into your career background, what you're doing, your thoughts of where things are at the moment. For me, like I say, it's been great. Actually been able to chat for 1 hour without any interruptions.
Exactly. We never have that time, do we?
That's a novelty in itself. So look, thanks ever so much, Dave. Appreciate it so much. And thanks ever so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of Recover, Perform, Excel. Thank you for listening. If you took something useful from today's conversation, share it with your team, your colleagues, or anyone on the rehab and performance journey. You can subscribe and find all episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at kikkohealth.com. And if you've got a myth to bust or a method to share, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So until next time, keep moving forward.